So I've been under the weather the last few days, but we're a few days into the 2-week period of each year that Hindus try to consciously let go of their attachment to their ancestors. That can involve doing some rituals and meditations. It depends on your demeanour, basically. But it's made me think about how in Western culture we've really come to the point where we spend a lot of our time kind of focusing on the failings of our ancestors, and quite often that comes out as a sort of blaming or a sense of lack. And it's almost got to the situation now where in the well-being community, like, you're not well unless you've identified some kind of fault in the way that your parents brought you up. Miura! So I wanted to talk about this a little bit because it seems to me that this attachment to the idea of trauma, whilst it's very useful in many ways, and don't let me take away from that, it's also only one level of well-being, because it seems to me that it's really bound up in a sense of there having been a Garden of Eden or some kind of perfect situation from which we have fallen, from which we've been cast out, and that we're constantly trying to compensate, atone, make good some kind of failing or some kind of distancing or separation from some kind of ideal situation. And certainly it's got to the case now that, perhaps correctly, people are saying that everyone suffers from trauma. And my point is that if everyone suffers from this state, then there's clearly no state for us to get back to. This is the normal state. And this sense of lack that people suffer from when they talk about being traumatized, or I'm not going to go on about that. Let's talk about how people feel about the way that they were brought up or their ancestors. That sense of lack, or that sense of things not having been perfect, is actually the cause of our suffering once we get to a certain level of understanding. And actually, throughout humanity, people have always had these situations or these influences in their lives that we're now calling trauma. Perhaps we could use the word conditioning. That might be a little bit more useful. But responses that come out because of things that happened in the past. This isn't like some kind of failing on our part or some kind of deviation from a norm or ideal. It is just the way that human beings are. And actually, let's celebrate the fact that we lead such privileged and safe lives now that we're able to focus on this. Now I'm going to take that idea a little bit further and talk about the idea that perhaps throughout history, until very, very, very recently, people have been a lot less safe than they are now. We talk about not feeling safe as if it's a state which we shouldn't be in. But actually, the human condition is one of constantly not being safe and then recovering from not feeling safe to a feeling of safety. Now, it's absolutely true, as usual, apologies for the sound of the river, it's absolutely true that our lifestyle has changed such as we no longer live in situations where we feel unsafe and then we recover from feeling safe. We live in situations where this feeling of being unsafe is prolonged. So it's not so much that we live in a situation that we need to find situations in which we feel safe. Like in discussions and in interactions, it's quite common now for the idea of not feeling safe to be weaponized, and people to say, I don't feel safe, as a way of excusing very poor behavior. Certainly in, intimate relationships. And the point that I'm making is that it's entirely normal for humans not to feel safe, and it's what we've lost is this ability to not feel safe and recover from it. And it's one of the things that I've noticed about my life here in the mountains and the activities and things that I do, is that actually, like, putting myself in situations where I don't feel safe is a huge reset in my life. Putting myself in situations of varying degrees, and that's another point that I'll come up to, but putting myself in situations where I feel like my life is in danger, and then surviving those situations, normally because it wasn't in that great danger, like the risk analysis hopefully is, or at least I know how to mitigate the risks, and then coming back from that then recontextualizes a lot of the things that have been troubling me and perhaps triggering me in my everyday life. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is this binary situation, this duality between feeling safe and feeling unsafe. I'm not sure, and I'm aware of, but not an expert in some of the theory that goes around this, I'm not sure that this duality is necessarily the situation that we have. And I'm not even suggesting that it's a spectrum or gradient. I think that we actually have, and I think this based on deeply studying myself in a variety of situations that we might describe as safe or unsafe. I think that actually it's a situation where there is a palette of states, a palette of how we feel about a situation that mix together to create our current feeling. So I think that it's overly simplistic to think about ourselves as being in this triggered state or an untriggered state, a safe state or an unsafe state, an activated state or a calm state. And it's certainly, we have this dichotomy in the way that we think about growth in well-being and self-development situations. There's this idea that we can only grow and learn when when we feel safe, and if we're triggered we can't. But there's also this idea that we can only grow and learn when we're outside our comfort zone. And even that kind of conflict is an indication that our models aren't quite right. So I don't really have a conclusion about this, other than to come back to my original starting point and maybe not be so simplistic about the way that we think about our upbringing. Almost all of our parents had imperfections that have helped condition us to react to things in certain ways. It's very difficult even for me to step outside that paradigm. But almost all of our parents also made sacrifices, also took great joy in our existence and our presence, also did so much to create and birth and support the people that we are now. So over the next week and a half, there's all sorts of reasons, and maybe this video is the only one in your life, but there's astrological, cultural, all sorts of reasons to allow yourself to let go of your attachment to ancestors, certainly those that have passed, but also perhaps ancestors that are here and now, and let go of your attachment to how you think about them and how you position their role in whom you are. Because it's also true that the fact that you're able to grow, there is a truth in the fact that you have a choice in how you are. You have a choice in how you feel about things. Even the state of fear, which one might describe as being an extreme state of feeling unsafe, is something that you have a choice about. Because our emotions are responses to physiological states. In one modelling, one might argue that, you know, our physiology is a manifestation of something else, but, you know, our emotions are something that we associate with physiological states. If we disassociate that connection and see and observe the emotion and see and observe the physiological state, then suddenly we have absolute choice. And isn't that wonderful? I'm grateful to my parents for bringing me to this moment. And now the sun's going down and I'm going to celebrate that. Have a lovely evening.